So let's bring in here the Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor. Angus, many thanks for your time. Now, look, I've got to say, if you were Treasurer, you'd be pretty much doing many of the things that the government is right now doing. One-off cost of living relief. You'd also be sitting there trying to find ways to make certain that the budget long term is at least in some sort of order in terms of spending, because you know NDIS, defence spending, is going to continue to rise into the future.
Well, Ross, can I say right up front, I mean, inflation is rampant through the economy now. This latest data just tells us how rampant, 7% over the last 12 months, but it's across almost every category of goods and services, particularly persistent on services, but it's a long way back to the 2 to 3% target, and it's going to be a hard road to get there. To expect the Reserve Bank to do all the work is nuts, frankly. They can't do that. The government
Jim Chalmers blames you and your side of politics, and basically says that a decade of spending and the $1 trillion debt, which is not $1 trillion, I recognise that, but all of that sort of rhetoric keeps on coming out from the Treasurer, pointing it back to your side of politics for the situation he's in right now.
Well, this is a Treasurer who won't take responsibility. This is a Treasurer looking for someone to blame. I mean, he'll blame Vladimir Putin if he thinks he can get away with it. But the truth is, we're seeing right across all categories of spending, with very few exceptions now, rampant inflation, and a government that has no plan to deal with it. Now, the starting point that if I was Treasurer, I'm not, but if I was, my starting point would be to say inflation comes from Canberra. The government has serious levers it can pull that can take pressure off inflation, and it's gobsmacking in this environment that in the last budget in October, we saw a government that took away a commitment to budget balance as a key component of the fiscal strategy. They've given up the ghost on this.
Name three for me. I mean, I'll give you one that you could throw out there. There is a Fair Work Commission hearing coming up. The government says, well, we think the workers' pay should go up by inflation, which right now is 7%. Would you be saying that?
No, just take a step back. Let me finish. I mean, the first thing you do is you do what every household and business has to do, which is to say, we're committed to budget balance. We're going to find a way back to budget balance. Now, the truth is, from when the economy opened up from the pandemic in October 2021 through to the election, the budget was in balance. That was the position they inherited. Then they got to their October budget. They ditched any objective of budget balance. And of course, we know, and any economist will tell you, if a government spends more money, if a government has given up the ghost on budget balance, then it's going to put upward pressure on prices and upward pressure on inflation, on interest rates. So, that's where we're at. I mean, at a time like this, to give up on budget balance as a core component of the fiscal strategy of this government is truly beyond belief. But that's what Jim Chalmers has done. So, we have a very different view on this.
Okay, but Angus, but would you be handing out that one-off relief to low-income households that are right now having to bear the burden of 15 to 25% electricity price increases, big increases in gas prices, petrol price increases, all these things? So basic food prices have gone up for them. They've got to have some relief at some point.
And the best form of relief is downward pressure on inflation and interest rates, because it's across the board, because it affects everybody, and we all benefit from it. And that's the one kind of relief that this Treasurer has completely given up the ghost on, Ross. And, we've got to relearn these incredible lessons that we got out of the 70s and 80s, where we learnt you can't just rely on central banks to do all the work. You've got to have governments doing heavy lifting. And the last thing you need when you've got inflationary pressures in the economy is a government that wants to throw money at everything. Now, he says he's not going to, but why would you take away a commitment to budget balance if you genuinely wanted to balance the budget? He doesn't want to do that because he's got this long queue of vested interest and ministers asking him for money. We saw it in Question Time a few weeks back where they got up one after another saying they needed more money. This is where Labor is at. Now, what we need is a budget that seeks to balance the books, that actually lays out an objective of balancing the books, takes pressure off Australian families and businesses that are seeing these extraordinary pressures on their cost of living and their cost of doing business, a recognition that the government has to take responsibility, a recognition that inflation does come from Canberra. But sadly, what we've got now is this situation where I think it's becoming more and more obvious that you always pay more under Labor.
Okay, so the Treasurer is also seeking your assistance to have bipartisan agreement over the recommendations from the RBA review. Are you broadly of a mind to agree to those recommendations?
Well, we've seen the review, and there's much I like in the review, particularly a sharp focus on containing inflation from the Reserve Bank. But you've got to start from the point of view that the Reserve Bank doesn't cause the inflation, the government causes inflation, and the government has to play a critical role in this. So to let the Reserve Bank become the major issue in this is clearly the wrong pathway.
Okay, so I get that, but are you going to give that bipartisan support to the Treasurer to allow it not to be fought over in the Senate?
Well, we haven't seen the legislation yet that's going to enable the changes that they want to make in this review. So I can't comment on that before we see the legislation. As I say, there's much to like about having a Reserve Bank that is singularly focused on making sure they're containing inflation, making sure that we've got the strong economy that you get from an environment where you've got low inflation, and that is transparent and accountable. And there was a number of many recommendations in there that are very positive in that direction. We haven't seen the legislation that'll enable this. I tell you the one concern, though, I'll articulate right now, Ross, is that having seen that review, seen the recommendations handed down, including very strong recommendations on appointment processes for members of the board and the proposed monetary policy board as well, we immediately saw Jim Chalmers make an appointment that just completely ignored those recommendations around appointments. And that was incredibly disappointing. If the government is serious about making sure we've got an independent, capable, credible Reserve Bank and has accepted the recommendations of this review, they should follow the recommendations of the review. But within minutes, we've seen the exact opposite. So, we are serious about an independent, credible, capable Reserve Bank. We are serious about working with the government to make sure we've got that. But the government's got to be serious about what it says it's going to do. And sadly, we've got a government increasingly that says one thing and does another.
Angus Taylor, good to have you in the program today. Many thanks for your time.